In this video, I'm going to use a bunch of famous charts to show some of the subtleties of Aштакаварга. And in this video, I'm just going to look at the points. I'm just going to snapshot the Aштакаварга. I'm going to look at the points and make connections. When you're actually working with people, you really want to see always what planets are supporting what planet to get them all the information they need to make good choices. But as I'm just using famous charts that I don't know all the details of their lives, and I don't have hundreds of hours to spend, correlating all their details, I just want to use their full points so we can just see some, ideas of Aштакаварга come through without all the details. And you can do this too. Sometimes you just need a snapshot technique, and then Aштакаварga is a good way to go. Okay? Aштакаварga is one of the best snapshot techniques that there is. So we're going to look at a bunch of famous people's charts and see what we can learn from their examination. The first chart is Muhammad Ali. And for Ali, everyone of course is going to say, okay, let's look at Mars. He's a boxer, he's a fighter, he's an athlete. We have to look at Mars, especially as he's a fighter. And here we see Mars has got 5 points, which is the highest amount of points that any sign has. So that makes sense. We would expect that in someone like Ali. The next thing that would commonly be done is we would go to the third from Mars and then get somewhat of a disappointment when we see that, wait a minute, the third from Mars has got 3 points. Well, the third from Mars has to do with siblings and co-workers, and it's not necessarily having to do with boxing though. Okay, the third house is a house of courage in a sense, but I found that when it comes to athletes, the third from Mars, the Aштакаварга points there are not that critical. What's critical is the first from Mars, which is their personal strength. And the other important house is the 8th from Mars. The 8th house has to do with our vulnerabilities, and it has to do with what we do to protect our vulnerabilities. So it's critical for an athlete, especially a fighter like Ali, to be able to protect their vulnerabilities, to have Mars very supported in protecting its weaknesses. And he has that with 5 points over here in the 8th from Mars. There's a reason that Mars gets the 8th house aspect, where it gets 100% strength, because the 8th from Mars is Mars protecting the vulnerabilities. The 8th from Saturn are our vulnerabilities, but the 8th from Mars is us fighting to protect them. So if a person's vulnerabilities are protected by more points in the 8th from Mars, then there's less chance of the problem of the person getting taken down. And it doesn't always mean taken down by another person, like in a fight, but simply, a boxer can show up with the flu on the day of the big fight, or not feeling well. And that's all it takes to cause him to lose. So it's really important that a person's, in threatening times, like during a bout, that they're able to protect their vulnerabilities, that they're able to show up there strong and fortified and at their best. And the 8th from Mars helps with that. Now, in Ali's case, as a heavyweight champion of the world, as a title holder and a medal holder, we need a good sun. He gets 6 points. And the 11th from the sun, the house of titles, gets 7 points. So it's an extremely supported sun. And again, the sun's in one of the highest points signs it could be in, and the 11th from the sun is the highest point. So we got a great sun as well. We go to some other athletes, like we'll go to Mike Tyson was another boxer. He had 5 in the house of Mars, so a very well supported Mars. The third from Mars just had 1 point, so it's not good again. But the critical 8th from Mars when it comes to an athlete, and especially a fighter, is well fortified with 5 points. So again, not only does he have his strength of his Mars is supported, but the defenses of Mars is also supported with that really nice 8th house from Mars. The sun itself is not as good, but the 11th from the sun has 6 points, which is the highest points we're going to find, which helps him with titles as well. Okay? So we see a very similar thing in their Mars, exactly the same. It's hard to get 5 points on Mars. It's not hard to get 5 points in a sign on Mercury, Jupiter, or Venus, because they have more points to go around. But it's hard to get 5 points. And to have those be the 1st and 8th house is really unusual. In the chart of Lance Armstrong, Mars gets 6 points. Wow, it's even better than Mike Tyson and Ali. And honestly, Lance Armstrong was a greater athlete in his field than either of them. He dominated like no one else has ever dominated stage racing. Much more than those boxers did. And the 8th from his Mars has got 5 points once again, so his defenses are fortified. So it's a really positive Mars that we have here. Okay, so Mars, of course, is your competitive nature, your desire to prove yourself, the fire you have to get what you're hungry for. Athletes are hungry to win, so Mars is really important. They're willing to fight really, really seriously, and if they're supported in that fight, they're going to have an easier time winning. A big difference in Lance's chart, he's got 5 points with the Sun, not as good as the other guys, as the boxers we saw. The 11th from the Sun is an average 4 points. So as far as titles are concerned, he's not doing really as good. And while he won 7 Tour de France's, those titles were not supported for him, and he lost them all as well. They were all taken away from him because of his, drug scandal. So perhaps if he'd had more points in the 11th from the Sun, he would have gotten a little more support to be able to keep his titles as the greatest Tour de France champion of all time. As it was, he lost it. And he's not the only Tour de France champion to take drugs. I'm sure they all have from at least the 70s onward when drugs were more readily available. So, too bad his Sun wasn't better, but you can see he has a fantastic Mars. We compare that to another cyclist chart, TJ Van Garderen. Well, TJ was an up-and-coming cyclist in the United States. He was, junior champion multiple times, before he was 18. He did okay as he got older. His first year of professional cycling was his best year, and it's been downhill ever since, with this last year really being his worst year. He's just been going downhill ever since his first year as a pro. And we can see Mars, 2 points. And the 8th from Mars, 3 points. He doesn't have the strength or the defenses to win the races, not the important ones. And what always happens with him, he always gets sick. Something always makes him sick. And whereas guys like Lance Armstrong, they show up on the big days. It's not like they never get sick in their entire life, but when they need to be well, when they're in a chance of getting in trouble, their bodies, they have the luck, the support to their system that they're not going to be sick that day. TJ unfortunately hasn't had that. He's been racing Tour de France on antibiotics and things like that. And I can't imagine trying to do a 150-mile bike ride in a day on antibiotics, because I just feel like antibiotics just wipe me out the times I took them when I was young. So anyway, he doesn't have the Mars for it. And, his career's just been dwindling down. He hasn't had the Mars for it, sadly. His Sun is 4 points. The 11th from the Sun is 5 points. So he had some titles. He was junior champion in the United States several times. But really, being a junior champion in the United States doesn't take a lot of Mars. The level of racing in the United States doesn't compare to the level of racing in Europe, where it's really 10 times as hard, 10 times as much competition, and especially on the pro level, nothing compares to it. And he doesn't have the Mars for that. But he has the Sun to have some titles supported at least. Okay. One thing I've talked a lot about always with athletes is like Venus's, just the bodily strength, the vitality of the body, and that's important too, the endurance of the body, the ability of the body to regenerate itself. Well, you can see TJ with 7 points with Venus, he has that. Okay? He has that regenerative quality supported with Venus. And you also see that, let me pull him up. Lance Armstrong has 6 points with his Venus. It's also, great. It's a lot of support to recuperating his body. That's critical for someone who's a stage racer because they're breaking down their muscles and they have to get up the next day and race again. Boxers don't have to do that to the same degree. It helps because then they can train harder, but a boxer, he prepares for months for a fight. He gets beat up, and then he can take as long as he wants to get better. He doesn't have to go out and fight the next day. It'd be interesting if they did that. If they had, 3-week-long bouts where fighters fought every night. But they wouldn't, because they'd probably get killed with that much abuse. But they do the same, they do it on the bike, and that Venus is really critical. So while Lance has it and TJ has it, TJ doesn't have the Mars. He doesn't have the fight, and he doesn't have the defenses to win the fight. So, things go wrong for him. He's out, fought on the battlefield of the bike race and things like that. So he's just not cutting it. Okay. And also, for those of you all who are wondering, I forgot to mention this, if you're looking for this screen in Kala, this screen doesn't exist in Kala. I just made it by going to screens. There's main screen 2, 3, and 4. These are blank screens. You can click on one. Then you can just kind of make your own little Aштакаварга screen by right-clicking on the screen and pulling up the Aштакаварга chart. So that's really all I did, and just made a little screen. So that's where that is, in case you are wondering. Okay. All right, let's put that one away. All right, I wanted to look at some financial people, okay? Bill Gates. So Bill Gates, of course, was one of the wealthiest people in the world. So we'd expect to see a good Jupiter. And Jupiter solid with 7 points. The second from Jupiter is mediocre. It's just sitting at 3 points. And so it's hard to think of him being the richest guy in the world. But if we look further, we can see some more stuff going on. One thing is that's very important is Mercury. While Mercury himself only gets 4 points, the 10th from Mercury gets 8 points. You rarely will see a perfect 8 point in Aштакаварга. If you find an 8 point, try to figure out, what does that house mean? That house is going to get a lot of support for them. So what does the 10th house from Mercury mean? Okay, we know the 10th house from Saturn is from Sun is power. We know the 10th house from Saturn is the 10th house for Saturn is, of course, doing great things, great burdens that lead to great things. We know the 10th for Mars is command, like a general has command over the battlefield. Not the final command, but command over a situation at hand is the 10th for Mars. The 10th for Mercury, however, is command of a business. So as the top executive in a corporation, it's the 10th from Mercury that's the critical thing. And you can see he has a full 8 points there. So that's largely what's contributed to his success, his business success. Okay? So that's a really nice thing he has. And of course, Jupiter does pretty good as well. But you're going to always see some different things in different people's lives, even though they might have what looks like the same type of career. If we go to Warren Buffett, also one of the richest guys on earth, he has got Mercury with just 4 points. You're like, how can this great, successful person have this many points? Well, let's look at Jupiter. Jupiter's sitting nice with 6 points, the highest Jupiter amount. The second from Jupiter is 5. Not bad at all. But there's a lot more to it. If you look at Mercury, you'll see that the 5th from Mercury has got 7 points. And the 5th from Mercury is the house of luck. Now, in a lot of astrology books, Western astrology books, they'll give the 5th house as speculation and gambling. It's not the house of those things. The actual house of gambling, of taking financial risks in hopes of rewards, high rewards or unusual rewards, is the 8th house. Okay? But the 5th house is the house of luck. And it's the house of luck because the person knows what's going to happen. Somehow they just have a hunch, a knack, or an insight, or a method to figure things out, that they basically know the future to some degree, enough to make themselves come off as lucky, right? Knowing the right time to do the right things, that little luck that comes from some skill, some intelligence that resides within the person, is the 5th house. Having that luck is what makes a person a successful speculator, a successful gambler, a successful stockbroker, and so on. And the key planet for those things is Mercury, and the 5th from Mercury is sitting with the full, well, not a full, but a very high 7 points. The act of gambling, the financial risk that an investor makes, playing with other people's money and playing with stocks, is the 8th house. The 8th house from Mercury is pretty good with 5 points. And finally, to get your fortune in life, your share in life, the 4th from Mercury is important, which is not too shabby with 5 points. But the best thing he has going for himself is this 5th house. And you can also say the 11th house, which is gain, 11th house, from Mercury, which is trade or business or gambling. Mercury represents all those things. So these two 7-point houses go a long ways in helping him be financially capable. And of course, the 8th house is good and the 4th house is good too. So those things all help. So he largely has a really good Mercury. So he's made his money really through speculations, through stock investments, where he's been extremely shrewd, extremely lucky. And that's shown by this really wonderful Mercury. It's the primary planet that's allowed him to do that. So here you have Bill Gates on one hand, Warren Buffett on the other. Both really wealthy individuals, both who've made money on stock in the stock market, but in very different ways. One guy who's played the game, Warren Buffett, the lucky game of stock investments. Another person who's managed a very, a huge corporation that was worth millions, billions, whatever, in the stock market. And Mercury was part of it, but it was very different houses from Mercury that allowed for those very different things. And they both had some strength to their Jupiter to help Jupiter to get support to give them more money. Okay? All right. Donald Trump we can look at too. Donald Trump's Mercury, well, it's just average, but the 11th from Mercury, gains from business, is sitting with the full 8 points. So he's really got that nice. He doesn't have the 5th from Mercury. He doesn't have the knack for investments that Warren Buffett has. But he's got a very nice Mercury with, an okay Mercury, average Mercury, but a very nice 11th from Mercury, which can be gains from business. And so he's really rocked in that department. That's where he's done it. But you can see how, there's some other things that aren't as great. So he's, hasn't reached the level of some other people. Jupiter is one of the main reasons why his worth isn't of Warren Buffett or Bill Gates. And that is Jupiter just has 3 points. The second from Jupiter has 6 at least, but Jupiter himself isn't as pretty. Anyway, we'll get back to him some, later. Actually, we can do it now, I think. All right. So as president, power, needs a good sun. You can see his sun gets 6 points. In fact, his sun is in its highest sign. It's always fun to look at for any planets that have the highest points in Aштакаварга in their sign. If they do, that planet's going to be important to the person. Somehow that planet's going to get a lot of support, and they're going to have it. So Trump has that with the sun. 6 points, the highest sign there is. On the other hand, if you get a person who's got a very low planet, it means that planet doesn't get any support or much support, and so they'll struggle with that planet much more. It'll be a lot harder to get that planet productive for them. They still can if it's good in the chart and that planet's forming good yogas, but it's going to be a much more difficult road. When a planet has some supportive planets to it, when a planet has some Aштакаварга points that support it, then there's just a lot of support that somehow makes things possible that may not seem possible. And really, Trump becoming president is one of those things that really didn't seem possible in lots of ways. Yet his son is very supportive, so somehow something that didn't even seem that possible became possible. The 10th from the sun is the house of power, where he gets 5 points, the second highest strength. So he's got a really nice sun here. Now, Hillary Clinton has a 4-point sun. It's a mediocre sun, average sun. So she didn't become a powerful person. However, the 10th from the sun is boosted with 7 points. So she had power as, Secretary of State. And look at the 7th from the sun, the house of husband's power, right? She had power, she had sun influence due to her husband too. She was first lady. But she herself has never been the source of direct power because the sun is weak. So her sun is not supported in direct power. Okay? But she's wielded power with the strong 10th from the sun, and she's been in partnership with power with the strong 7th from the sun. But Donald Trump, was the source of power, became the source of power as the President of the United States. The single most powerful source of power in the United States is the presidency, and the sun there gives him that with 6 points. Okay? However, you can see by Hillary, she's had more power in her life in a sense of she's been around power forever. She's been married to it. She's worked in it. She's been other political positions. So she's been part of power a longer, forever. And that's because of the 7 points in the 10th from the sun. But she's never been the force of that power like what's his name, Donald Trump has been, because her son just didn't have as much support to give her that. Okay? We can look at some other things too. In a president or a presidential possibility, one of the things that president is they're the commander-in-chief of the forces of the country, which means they're going to have the most say about what those forces are doing, which means they're like the main general. And so you have to look at Mars and anyone you're thinking about voting for to see if they're going to be able to fulfill that martial role. Now, Hillary Clinton has a great Mars. 5 points to Mars and 5 points, in the 8th from Mars. So she can give Muhammad Ali a run for his money in the ring, okay? So if war were to happen, she would be a great person to be in charge of decisions bearing on that war. However, this Mars may cause her to want to invest in war readily because it's something she's capable of. Let's go look at Trump. Trump has 4 points to Mars and 4 points in the 8th from Mars. When it comes to, strength in war and defending the vulnerable points, Trump isn't as good as she would be. He would not be as good of a commander-in-chief according to Aштакаварга. However, he's also less likely to go to war because of that. Okay? So in a politician's chart, if they're going to be in a really important place like president, look at Mars to see who's going to be more capable of defending the country. In this case, Hillary Clinton's chart has Mars has more support in Aштакаварга to defend the country. And we can look at the points and we can say these are the things that will help them support the country, defend the country, and these are the things that will get in the way based on what the planets are there. So that's one planet you want to look at. The other thing you want to look at is Venus, because Venus is the planet of statesmanship, of being able to work in political situations to achieve harmonious results. This is the whole feeling out of politics. It's the fine art of politics is Venus. And so Trump's Venus is sitting just at 4 points. And the 7th from Venus is the house of diplomacy, of, politically working things out. And it's only got 3 points. So Trump, this is why he's not considered a great statesman, okay? When we look at Hillary Clinton, her Venus has got 4 points, and her 7th from Venus has got 2 points. So she's not really that good either, okay? She wouldn't do a great job as dealing with foreign relations and those type of things either. Now, one important thing in Hillary's chart is that the 8th from Venus, which has a lot to do with, political dealings, like basically agreements made between political parties and, I don't know the proper word for it, slipping my mind. But being able to sort of negotiate political alliances and, come to terms with an agreement, she's much better there with 6 points. Whereas Trump has got just 4 points there. But ideally, you want a person with a good Venus, a good 7th from Venus, and a good 8th from Venus as possible if you want a really great statesman. Now we're going to look at a couple of musicians' charts. First one we're going to look at is Elvis. Now the Karaka of music is the moon, and the third from the moon is music as well, the talent of music. And Elvis has 5 points with the moon, and he's got 5 points in the third from the moon. That's the highest points he's got. So his music is supported. His musical ability is supported. Now, Venus is entertainment. He's got 4 points with Venus, just so. But the house of entertainment is the third. The third from Venus gets a nice 6 points. So that part of Venus is doing a little bit better. Okay. Seventh from Venus is relationships, which were difficult. Only has 3 points, sadly. But the third from Venus, he's doing pretty good on that, which helped him as an entertainer. Interesting enough, he does not have a good sun. He's got 3 points to the sun. The sun is the singer, according to Gemini. The second from the sun sits at just 3 points too. It's really not that good. And, you might be surprised at that, but you'll see quite a bit of times that in modern singers, meaning singers that don't have to have voice training, so not necessarily like opera stars, not even Indian musicians who really, classical Indian musicians as well, the voice is really trained to be an instrument. That's something that modern singers don't have to focus on as much as, classical singers. So modern singers, rock and roll singers and things like that, you don't need to see the most supported sun, and you'll oftentimes not see the most supported sun. You'll see other things being supported, okay? Namely, one of them being the moon is really, I found, the most important one in general. And following that, Venus is important. He's got 6 with Venus. But he doesn't have the greatest sun, okay? So if someone says, should I be a singer, and you don't see a good sun, doesn't necessarily mean they won't have any support with their music. Look for their moon. Pay more attention to the moon. In Elvis's chart, 5 points for the moon, and 5 points in the third from the moon are the highest points the moon has to offer. So he's fortunate in that regard. We look at someone like Billy Joel. Billy Joel, one of the most financially successful musicians, super famous in Europe and Russia. He did really well, actually, believe it or not. And, did really well. Now, let's see. His sun as a singer is 5 points, and the second from the sun is 5. That's what you're normally going to expect in a singer. You see it here. The moon itself has 5 points. And the third from the moon is sitting at 6 points. It has a great moon. Venus is 4 points, and the third from Venus, which again is entertainment, is 3 points. Well, unlike Elvis, he didn't make movies. Okay, he wasn't trying to be a movie star and stuff, but he was a much more serious musician in a sense, as we can see by the sun and the moon. He had a lot more support in his music and his singing, but he didn't have the entertainment support as great of a deal in the context of acting and things like that. Sales, Jupiter, he made a lot of money. Jupiter's got 6 points. The second from Jupiter is 6 points. He was, filthy rich. Sold so many albums, like high numbers. One of the most, for a while, he might have had more album sales than anyone else on earth for some period. He had some remarkable achievements in sales, thanks to this really nice Jupiter. Okay, another musician I've got here is Madonna. Madonna is really fun to look at. Her moon is just sitting at a poor 3 points. One of the weaker signs there. The third from the moon's better with 5 points, but not what you expect from a musician. Venus is with 5 points, pretty nice. The third from Venus is with 5 points, so we see a lot of entertainment support, but not a lot of support with music. And you go, well, how did she become such a icon of music? Well, let's look at the sun first of all. It's got 6 points. And, this is a really strong sun. This is someone who has a lot of support to be somebody, okay, to be something, to be a powerful influence. And she started out just wanting to be famous, You know, she just wanted to shine. She didn't have a love of music and say, oh, I want to be a musician. I love music. No, she wanted to be famous. She figured the best way to become famous was to be an actress. She tried that and she failed miserably. And then she got up and said, I'll try music. And she tried music. And if music had failed, she would have got up and tried something else. But music worked for her. She was able to make that work. Probably the 5 points from the third from the moon helped with that. And of course, as a singer, the strong sun helped too. But the bigger part of the picture, I think, was this really nice Mercury. Mercury gets 5 points, but most importantly, the 10th from Mercury has 7 points. And so this is her, you know, one of the interesting things about Madonna is she self-managed herself. She managed herself. She was her own person. She was in command of her own career. And that's this strong Mercury. With 7 points in the 10th from Mercury, she was going to be in charge. She was not going to not be in charge. So she had this great managerial ability and support to her managerial ability that helped her become successful. And with this Mercury, she would have been successful in whatever she set out to do. Because that's the nature of Mercury. It supports anything. Okay? And she was going to be in charge of anything she was going to do thanks to this 10th, very supported 10th house from Mercury. She just had a lot of luck in that area. Venus is nice too as an entertainer with 5 points. And the, you know, third from Venus has also got 5 points. So pretty nice Venus. But I think, you know, really, as Mercury was a big part of her ability to make a success for herself, this 10th house from Mercury. Whenever you see anyone's chart, always look for, look for the high houses from a planet and try to see how that house is coming into their life, because they'll usually come into their life in a really important way. The most interesting musician, as I have an example, is really John Lennon. We look at him and we go 5 points for the moon. All right, that makes sense, but it couldn't have been 6. And then you look at the third from the moon is only a measly 2 points, though. You know, like, how did he become so successful with music? The moon could be a lot better. We look at the sun, it's got 4 points. The second from the sun has got 4 points. It's just like so-so. It's not amazing in any capacity. But then you go to Venus, and you see Venus is in super high points, 7 points. And then you go, well, Venus is going to have to factor into John Lennon's success. It was just going to have to factor into his success. And I think it did in the context, I'm sure it did, that, you know, his whole message of, you know, peace, love, and all that stuff, you know, that message that the Beatles were sort of the forefront of, and their music was a forefront of, that's what was supported in John Lennon, was his Venus. Because Venus, of course, is the planet of harmony, love, and happiness. And the fourth from Venus, which is, you know, sort of is all about that feeling, has got the nice 6 points. So it's this Venus, it's the energy he brought that escalated him to success, more than anything else that we see here. Okay? Of course, the 5 points with the moon helps. You know, moon with high points helps support a person's in being who they are, and usually that's shown by a charisma that appeals to many people. He had a great Mercury. He had some good business sense, for sure, some good mercurial sense. But the best, biggest planet for him, Aштакаварга-wise, is this Venus. That's going to be a key planet for his life working. And you can always do that. Just look at what planet is best in Aштакаварга, and that planet will somehow be, you know, it's going to be super supported and almost always part of the great things that work out for them. Okay? Okay, here's another interesting chart. Again, I'm throwing out charts and subjects with some surprises. This is Linda Lovelace. So she's one of the old porn stars, I guess. I got a birth date here of 1949. So, you know, you could say an early porn star. And what are we going to look for? Well, we have to look to Venus. Okay, the Venus gets 6 points. Okay, so Venus, sensuality, sexuality is supported. We need to expect that. We also have to look at the 8th house, because the 8th house is the house of taboos. And so taboo, sexuality, porn, there's a lot going to do with the 8th house. And we see there's 5 points there as well, or 5 points. So a nice Venus, as you'd expect. But an important thing you have to look at, too, is Mars. So Mars here gets 1 point. So it's a weak Mars, just 1 point on that Mars. And Mars, of course, has to do with a person's staying power as much as their willpower. It's also their won't power. And one thing a porn star has to have is a high capacity for no won't power. They have to not say no to things. They can't be too picky about things. They can't be too strong-minded about things. You know, they're going to have sex with people that they might, you know, not like, that they might want to say no to. And they're really not going to have as much freedom to who they say yes or no to. And so the Mars here is just not that particular. Mars, when it's low in points, doesn't have to have things be a certain way. Doesn't, you know, have to, doesn't have as many reasons to say no to something or to push something away. So you'll find a low Mars quite often in, you know, charts of people who have a lot of sex or charts of porn stars. If Venus is supported, though, okay, if all those pleasures of Venus are supported. We look at another porn star, and Tracy Lords, who is, I guess, not as old of a porn star, but a later generation porn star. Mars has 2 points. It's a weak Mars once again. And so it's that won't power is not very much supported. Venus has got 4 points, just average, but the 8th from Venus is boosted with 6 points. So we see the, you know, the taboo sensuality that's supported in Venus here. But again, a key thing is that weak Mars. So what this means is people with a low Mars are pushovers for whatever they're involved in. They're just pushover people. They don't have as much things to support their idea of what they want to do. They don't have much planets to support their fight. So you look at Lance Armstrong, you know, these people are not pushovers. They got 5 points with their Mars, you know, this super powerful Mars. They're not pushovers. They have a lot of energy, a lot of support to their Mars. And so they're not going to give in. TJ, 2 points or something with his Mars. So when it comes to push and shove really hard, he lets himself get shoved around, something Lance Armstrong just wouldn't let himself do. So being a porn star is a lot about getting pushed around without really being able to care too much about how you're getting pushed around. So you get the weak Mars. So again, you can use Aштакаварга for all areas of life. Just try to figure out what the patterns are. And once you see the patterns, you know, or come up with some ideas and then test them and find the patterns. And you can use that once you understand the basics of planets and what planets rule, what houses rule. You can tackle any questions a person might have with Aштакаварга. You know, what do I look at? You just have to figure out what do you need to look at. And if you know your basics of planets and houses, you should always be able to figure out the Aштакаварга to look at. And you can look at it and give some, you know, give some clarity to the person. Okay, authors. I got a couple authors here. I got Frank Herbert, who wrote Dune. For authors, the moon's the most important planet to look at. Writing itself as a skill is Mercury, but because in writing we are teaching people, you can't really write anything without teaching someone to some degree. Jupiter and Venus are also important planets for writing. Because of that, Jamie says combinations of Moon Jupiter, Moon Mercury, Moon Venus, certain combinations of those will make a person an author. But the ingredient that always has to be there is the Moon. You don't always need Mercury, you don't always need Jupiter, you don't always need Venus. You need one of those, but you always need the Moon. Because to write, you have to have a vision of something in your head. And that vision of what's in your head is the Moon. So Frank Herbert gets 6 points with his Moon, the highest points possible. The 5th from his Moon has got, the 9th from his Moon, which is the house of stories, is got 5 points. So anytime you tell a story, a fable, a story, or even a myth, you know, anything that's not science, you're looking at, or music, you're looking at the 5th house. Scientific facts are 3rd house. But stories our fifth house. Or sorry, not fifth house, ninth house. So he has a nice moon with a nice ninth from the moon with 5 points. Okay, so, his moon is supported, which means if he's a writer, his writing will be supported. His imagination, his vision of his books is supported, and therefore he has success with them. Mercury is not doing very good, but the ninth from Mercury has got 7 points. Again, he helps him make a very good storyteller, even though maybe he's not the best writer, but he becomes an extremely good storyteller, ninth house from Mercury. Jupiter gets 5 points. Ninth from Jupiter is 3 points. So it's a decent Jupiter, but the ninth could be better. But again, the moon's the critical thing you'll find in the chart of authors. Venus, the other writing planet that's involved in writing, has got 4 points, with the ninth having 6. Now, one of the things he did a lot of, there was a lot of political machinations in his, most successful books, the Dune series, that means there's a lot of Venetian things going on in that book. And so we see the ninth from Venus is supported in him being able to tell, stories of political intrigue and things like that. But the primary planet, most important planet, is Moon, to have that vision that can be supported. And then the other planets, Venus, Jupiter, and Mercury, turn that vision into a book, and so that vision can be explored by other people and then supported by other people if the moon has got good points, as it does in Frank Herbert's chart. The other author I have is John Irving. He wrote, most famously, The World According to Garp. He also wrote a book called The Cider House Rules. So not a sci-fi author or someone like Frank Herbert, but someone who wrote, books about more modern living, more about life and people living life with, having the humorous events of their lives and the corny stories of creation that possibly can actually happen to real people. And you can see in his chart, the moon has got 7 points. Ninth from moon's not as good. So his tales were not as long as Frank Herbert's. Frank Herbert told a long tale. By long tale, I mean an outrageous tale of epic fantasy or science fiction that was really never going to happen. John Irving didn't, tell those kind of tales so much, but he had the nice moon. He had a vision of life that he was able to share. Mercury is getting 7 points. So a really, boosted Mercury, great writing skills, and also great, writing about common life in a way that's really interesting. Really just normal day-to-day, not normal, I wouldn't call normal, but, things that could possibly happen to anyone, actual things that happen written in really interesting ways. So more of a Mercury type storyteller. Had a very good Venus with 5 points, and, ninth house has 6 points. Jupiter has 5 points with ninth house as this. But his best planet is Mercury. His best ninth house is the ninth from Venus. But really, the moon is fantastic with 7. So moon and Mercury, two of the authorship planets, have a lot of support. His writing supported to 7. His moon is supported by 7, his vision. But yeah, he didn't spin the tallest tales because his ninth house wasn't as strong. So there wasn't as much, we can say, creation going on in the context of creating worlds and all kinds of things out of their imagination. But a very supported vision that he wrote down, and therefore a very successful author. Certainly more successful than Frank Herbert as far as number of books is concerned, and being translated into like 35 languages or something. Okay, so Aштакаварга is a lot of fun. I hope you're getting the feel for it, how much fun it is. You can just grab charts up and see some things. So grab a client's chart and see, okay, what's supported in their life? How is this planet supported? And then a good way to just work with Aштакаварга is just say, okay, look at the sign every planet's in. If a planet's in a particularly low sign, realize that they're not going to have a lot of support with that planet, and that planet's going to be a burden to them. It's going to be hard to get that planet going. and keep it going once it's going. Then, so they'll have problems revolving around that planet. Then look at the planet that has the highest points and realize that's the planet that is just going to take off for them the most readily. It's going to just, when they do it, it's just going to be supported so much more. But then also look at the highest house from every planet and try to figure out, okay, is this make sense? Like, do you want to play poker with John Irving? Well, let's see. He's got 7 points to Mercury, and the fifth house of luck has got 6 points. So no, you do not want to play poker with John Irving. Okay, you want to play poker with someone with 2 points here and 1 or 2 points in the fifth, if possible. Someone who has lower points than you. Okay, so there's all these things you can work with a chart to see where a person's getting more support. And if a person has more support, the chances of success are greater. If there's less support, the chances are less. Support's not everything, though. You know, there's also just the pure intensity of the person, how much they're going to push, you know, based on their yogas in the chart and the strength of their other, you know, their strength of their planets, the dignities and all those things. They're just their general level of health and energy, you know, you need to see. And so you'll find people who do quite well in life who don't have really supported Aштакаварга points, and maybe even low. If that's the case, whatever they've done it without a lot of support. I mean, they haven't had support of friends and siblings and institutions and all the things that can possibly support a person. Somehow they've just done it out of sheer inspiration or sheer grit or something, that they just done it somehow without support. But usually you're going to find the things, when you see people at a high level of success, you know, like world famous, the biggest people in things, you're going to see not only do they have the power in their chart in form of yogas and dignities and stuff, but you're going to see that planet is really supported in Aштакаварга as well. And that Aштакаварга support helps them take that planet to a higher level than you could take it without that support. So when you see a person who's got lower Aштакаварга values for their planets, realize that also means no matter how much they're into something, how capable or how great their yogas are, they're not going to be able to reach the highest peaks that are really possible, you know, because they don't have that extra level of support that Aштакаварга gives. As everything builds on top of each other. You know, if you see a planet forming a yoga and it's supported in Aштакаварга, then the person's yoga can, you know, has more support. Like John Irving, he has the moon with Jupiter on an angle. That's a Gajasara yoga. That yoga can give success and wealth and some good qualities. His moon is supported to 7 points. Jupiter is supported to 5 points. So that yoga gets like a lot of support and turns it into a more powerful yoga. So this idea of support, that there's things holding it up and moving it forward, helping it, it helps anything you see in the chart. Okay, it simply means there's just more energy helping that planet, and it's a nice thing to have. Those things will work easier. They'll be less stressful. Actually, I forgot a few charts that I had selected. Let me pull them up. Okay, the first person is the French painter Edouard Manet, who sort of was the person who initiated the Impressionist movement in France. You know, he got started in like the mid-1800s. The movement really took off in the latter part of the 1800s. So if we look at his Mercury, which is the Artesian, we see a wonderful Mercury with 7 points. And the third from Mercury, the house of, you know, artistry, is got 6 points. So we can see this is a person whose art was very supported. We also see the 6th from Mercury, the sales, you know, business sales, is also very much supported by him. So he had a nice story for an artist. He was a nobleman from a political family that had political clout, and he was expected to sort of follow the family, you know, the family paradigm of getting involved in politics, but he just couldn't do it. The things he had to learn to prepare for that, he didn't do well in them. And so his dad finally gave up and said, all right, you want to be an artist? Go be an artist. So here's this wealthy guy, who comes from a wealthy, powerful family, who gets to go become an artist. So he was very supported in his art. He opened his own studio. Even before he was like famous or anything, he said, I want a studio. I'm going to start showing my stuff. And he opens a studio. Most painters don't get to open a studio. Most painters have to beg the studio to take their work. But he didn't have to. So he was an extremely supported artist. And he also, is sort of like this father of a huge art movement. So he's really lucky there. Now, art itself is Venus, but the artisan, the person who makes the art, is Mercury. The art itself is Venus with 6 points. It's wonderful. The fourth from Venus is the house of the art that's actually made. He has 4 points here. All right, so he's quite supported as an artist. Okay, with that nice Venus. His exceptional Mercury, though, is really what made the difference for him. He had the support to go out and be an artist. He was never a struggling artist. Unfortunately for Van Gogh, we pull up Van Gogh's chart here, he's got 4 points for Mercury, and the third for Mercury has got 4 points too. And of course, he didn't have such a successful, he wasn't supported as readily as being an artist. He also died young. Now, sometimes in Aштакаварга, when you see a planet with low points, this lack of support means the person doesn't do it as many years. One way you don't do things for as many years as you die. Another way is you just start doing something else. So whenever you see a planet that's not as supported, it means the person's not going to do it for as many years for some reason. And of course, Van Gogh did not paint for that many years. He did a phenomenal amount of work in a short time. But if he had lived another 20 years, think what he could have produced. Then his art would have had a lot more support. So, but would we say he's not a great artist because his Mercury just has 4 points? No. What we're saying is, as an artist, he didn't have a lot of support. He didn't have the support of years. He didn't have years to paint. And he didn't have the wealth to paint, and the finances to paint. He was the struggling artist, of the most famous struggling artist there ever was. And one of the things is that if Saturn supports a planet, so if the person is getting a point from Saturn for that planet, then Saturn's going to support that planet, which means longevity can support that planet. Some Saturn thing, one of the Saturn things is longevity can support that planet. Van Gogh did not have Saturn supporting Mercury. Okay, so longevity, time duration, did not support his art. If other planets had, it would have been, again, it would have been nice for him. Okay, so don't expect there to always be great points just because a person does something well or not well. So you've sort of seen, like John Lennon, we didn't see a great moon or particularly great sun. So there are some patterns you'll see, but when it comes to human creativity, like writing, artistry, music, these are things that, a person's whole being is invested in. All of them is invested in that. It's not as linear of something as, being an athlete, where you just have to have strength of will and determination and the ability to, protect your vulnerabilities. There's, a lot more to some of these other things that people do. And so I've shown a lot of the possibilities of how things can be supported, how those things can be supported with Aштакаварга. And so as you do that, as you use Aштакаварга, keep that in mind. But you'll find these patterns are really easy to see, and things will jump out at you, and you'll go, wow, that makes total sense, and tell your client it, and it'll hit home. And as always, don't always, you remember that what we see in the Aштакаварga, in their charts, as we've looked at in the last 2 videos, is what's in the chart. It's their promise. But there's ups and downs within that promise. Okay? So when a planet's in a better transit position, expect the person to do more art. So when Mercury's in Pisces, expect Van Gogh to do more art, okay, and so on, to be more supported in the art he does, anytime it goes there. So, and of course, in general, your purpose in life is Jupiter. So anytime Jupiter's transiting a sign with more points, a person's purpose is supported. In fact, let's look at Van Gogh in his birth. He had 6 points with his Jupiter. That's a supported sense of purpose, okay? And his individual purpose, the first from Jupiter, he supported in that. He did it. Even as hard as his life was, he was determined to paint no matter what. He really felt like it was what he was meant to do. There was no changing his mind about it. So purpose, strong sense of purpose helps anything, of course. Okay, so always look for any planet that's good is helping the person the great things they've done. Ironically, Van Gogh has a great Saturn. So a sheer determination, insane determination, we could say. They got a great Venus. They have an appreciation of beauty, or a high appreciation of art, and a high capacity to see beauty. But Mercury, the act of doing art, and business, wasn't really strongly supported for him. He had vision, was supported with the moon, okay, nicely. Okay, so some more Aштакаварга stuff coming up, where we'll look at the actual point givers a bit more. Okay, thank you.